I'm Tom LeBlanc. I'm the editor of Commercial Integrator. And today I'm lucky to be joined by Zach Snook. He's the audio product manager for Biamp. Hey, Zach.
Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Not too bad. So we just did this deep dive coverage for Commercial Integrator about meeting room audio. And one of the things that's interesting about meeting room audio is, well, companies are really investing in their meeting rooms because meetings are changing and integrators have a great opportunity to work with them on creating AV solutions for their meeting rooms. The thing that is not so great is that often customers tend to focus their budgets almost entirely on the video aspect of meeting room technology. And for integrators, that's a tough thing. And it's something that they really ought to work with their customers on thinking differently about. I just want to get from you, why do you think it's such a big mistake if a customer kind of deprioritizes audio in the meeting room?
It's a huge mistake, and one that people have pain points on all the time. People look at audio as sort of the general thing that's always going to be there. It's easy to do. There's not much money that needs to be involved in it. It's just kind of an afterthought sometimes, and that's really not the right way to do it. I always kind of, when people ask me this question, I kind of come back to a story that I think many people have experienced. And when you go into a room and like you can get the camera to work, but they can't hear, and everybody's like, "Oh, I can't hear," and they're trying to figure out what's happening. That meeting doesn't move forward if you can't hear. And a lot of times you go into the same situation and the video doesn't work. People are like, well, whatever, at least we have audio, and they'll just move forward with that meeting. So really, audio is so important. It's the core of any successful conference. If you don't have audio, you're not going to move forward with that conference. People will move a room to get audio and deal with the room if they don't have video or document sharing. So it's a huge thing that needs to be looked at as sort of a minimum requirement. Now, unfortunately, what some people do is they put it as a minimum requirement. They don't consider good audio. They said, well, what's good enough? What can I do as the minimum thing to get my system up and running? And, in a sense that works. It gets you audio, but it's also interesting to talk to people that have a good audio experience. People will actually leave a conference and say, wow, that sounded really good. No matter which end you're on, if you're in the local end, what you hear from the distance end, or just somebody on a distant conversation, like that room sounded really good. So audio can be a differentiator in that aspect. And there's a lot of things that go into that. The outgoing sound is obviously going to be detailed by the microphones that you choose, the type of mic, the location of the mic. Are they on the table? Are they on the wall? Are they on the ceiling? Unfortunately, some people will kind of weigh this performance versus room function sometimes and say, well, I know this will sound better, but we can't have stuff on our table, so I need to move to a different location, or I put a microphone way in the middle of the table and expect it to pick up people on the far end. There's a lot of complexity and a lot of design considerations in choosing the audio for a conference room system. And that's where integrators really come in. If you look at some of the options that an IT admin may jump on and say, well, this is just the thing we put in the middle of the room. Sometimes it's just a desk phone. Sometimes it's a cell phone in the middle. They don't understand how bad that can be and how distracting it can be for the actual conference itself. So room audio, is hugely important in the fact that it makes your conference. You can't have it without it. And then good audio just takes it to the next level. And people recognize it even though they don't realize the importance of it up front. So it's hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, you use that example of, sometimes they just try to get away with what they can get away with in terms of audio, but that's not really in sync with how sophisticated meetings have gotten over the last few years. So organizations are, they're conducting these really collaborative, fast-paced meetings. And the thing that I think they forget is that along those lines, the audio has to be flexible with the meeting as it's moving so quickly. I wanted you to kind of talk about that. Like, in what ways does audio need to be flexible in order to keep pace with today's meetings?
Well, I agree with you totally. And I think meetings are becoming more and more frequent. It used to be that the conference that took place was the big conference room that's, put a bunch of money into, and it was the executive conference room, and it was hard to book, and it had to be a certain level meeting to get there. Well, that's changed. Now we have the onset of even a huddle room, where people are just expected to be able to jump into a room, have a collaborative conference with somebody at some distant end. It's becoming the way that people work. So even in a huddle space, a small room, there's some flexibility there. Some people say, well, I'll just put a speaker at the end of the table and call it good. But as rooms start to get bigger and bigger, the further away you move from that microphone, the more flexible the technology has to be. So there's beam forming and beam tracking that comes into that play. There's just multiple microphones on a table. So even in the simplistic room, flexibility is key. But then you move into the spaces that are designed to be very flexible. So if you think of multi-purpose spaces where I can be set up as a presentation one day, then a work group the next, or just have an open space that I can move things around. How do you cover that? How do you make sure that the audio is the best it can be there? And there's a lot of techniques for that. You could go out and simply just mic the room with every possible area covered as needed and put a large number of microphones and rely on EQing and auto mixing to set that up. But really, even with that, you're kind of into the situation where you're making your users focus on the tech when they should be focusing on the space in the meeting. So at Biamp, we've actually come out with a series of beam tracking microphones for our Tessera and Devio product line. Tessera, it's the TCM1. The advantage that we see in those microphones is you can drop them in these complex spaces. We have some calculators online to make sure that you have the required areas that need to be covered. And then the microphones themselves sort of come alive and they find people that are talking and that are using the room and they lock to them. The real advantage that it has for a user is I just go in my room, I set it up however I want. There's no need to go to a panel and fire a preset or make sure that something is aligned to the type of meeting I'm having that day. I just go in and I set up my room and I talk and I move about and I can do whatever I need to do no matter what my requirements are for those space. So our TCM1 mics and our Devio mics have really been designed with that thought in mind. They work perfectly in the smaller room that just has a microphone on the table. It still does that tracking around the room. But when you get into larger and more complex rooms, they really shine in their automation.